So tonight is the orientation evening, the first evening of 7 for this class on the ego. And I just wanted to start at this point saying, what is the background that has led up to me doing this class on everything you need to know about the ego? And when I was thinking about that, I could actually say that this class has been in the making for about 40 years. 40 years. Um, I would say going back to time around when I was 20, I had this event in my life where there was this massive waking up. You could say spiritual awakening at age 20, which was shortly thereafter followed by a great falling down, a great waking up by this great falling down. And some of this was catalyzed partly, the age I was at, but also messing around with drugs, messing around with energetic magic, and really kind of falling prey to delusional thinking, which led to something of a collapse. And I would say more than a psychological collapse, it was really in spiritual terms and in terms of initiation science, it was what you might call a spiritual miscarriage or an initiatory miscarriage that really left me in a place of losing myself, where I literally lost myself. I lost my identity. I lost my center, and I really had nothing to hold on to. And yeah, there was nothing of a center to hold on to. And what held me was basically my parents' basement because I had to drop out of university and I moved back home and ended up being in my parents' basement and being held externally by things, holding my center, which had been really collapsed and lost. So in a way, I lost my ego. I lost, whatever the ego is. We're going to be talking about that, but I'll just say that that's why this class has been in the works for 40 years, because it's been 40 years of really seeking and searching for what happened, how to recover from that, and what that all means, and how I can share that knowledge and information, and maybe even some wisdom around that with others who may be in similar situations. And I think we're all really in the same boat in trying to come to a sense of our own center and to develop that center. So during those years following, I ended up doing a training in spiritual psychotherapy, and even to this day, I work as a spiritual psychotherapist, which means I not only offer psychological support, but I go beyond that. I offer support to the spiritual development of people, and I contextualize psychological development really as a path of spiritual initiation, which is really exciting to look at what's going on in people's lives, and to not just label them in some sort of negative way and say, oh yeah, you're kind of damaged, and like this is all kind of bad, you need something to fix you. But rather to look at it in a positive light and go, yeah, you're on a path of initiation. You're on a path of activation, and you're on a path of self-recovery, self-discovery, self-creation. And to give people a different sense of what's going on in their lives, because right now our scientific medical paradigm really is turned towards the negative, to label people with this and that, and then they don't really know how to deal with these things, and so they end up medicating people and basically putting them in chemical straitjackets.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been exciting. It's been an exciting lifetime for me to be able to look at things in a different light, and I'm thankful for some of the training that I've had. Some other training I've done and work that I've done is also as a Waldorf school teacher. one point, I decided to do the 2-year training, partly in California and partly here in Toronto, to become a Waldorf school teacher. And the Waldorf uh, educational movement is an independent school movement that started pretty much 100 years ago in Europe. And it is based on a spiritual model of the human being, that it looks at the human being as having not only a physical body that needs to be trained and educated, but also similar to the Egyptians, that there's a Ka, there's a Ba, there's a Ku, there's an Ib, and so on and so forth. There's different levels that also have to be addressed. And so that was really helpful for me to get involved in that uh, educational system for a few years, partly because I had a daughter around at that time. And so it helped me to be a better father, to be able to look at the development of a child through different eyes than just being, some sort of physical being that pops out and needs to be fed. Um, that there's much more to the picture than that. And yeah, something I'll point out about this is that these other levels of our being are invisible. The Ka and the Ba, the Ku, they're invisible until they get expressed, until they manifest. So one of the things with my training as a Waldorf school teacher is the power of observation. To be able to observe what's being expressed, what's being manifest, and see that, something's being said in what is expressed through a child or any human being of the invisible, that the invisible is always trying to be made visible. Somewhat, in the physical body, our physical body is a visible manifestation of something that's spiritual in its essence. But there's other ways to see the invisible when we train our observation. And that's part of what we'll be doing in this class is training our powers of observation to be able to see the invisible. And this really leads into what you might consider clairvoyance, the ability to have clear seeing of a spiritual nature, to open our spiritual eyes. So, yeah, I worked for a few years as a Waldorf school teacher, working with children, and it was wonderful. But I felt the call to come back and work with adults again and return to my work as a spiritual psychotherapist. And eventually I developed what's known as the spiritual boot camp. That's really been the thrust of my life, is to try and expand this box of science that has really kind of been reductionist and, reducing us to looking at ourselves as just a physical being, kind of a half corpse, that has a brain, and supposedly we think with our brain, which I don't believe. So, been trying to write and teach and introduce concepts that get us to expand from just the physical view of things to something that includes metaphysical aspects. Metaphysical meaning beyond the physical, the invisible things that are trying to manifest and become visible. So I continue to work as a spiritual psychotherapist, and sometimes I refer to myself as Dr. Ego, or an ego doctor, because I'm not working with the physical, I'm not working with energy, I'm not working with emotional stuff. I'm really trying to go to the highest level of our being and help people to get centered and live and grow and evolve from really the highest downward, rather than so much of our emphasis is like on the lowest, trying to move up, like take more vitamins, do more exercise, get enough rest. All this physical stuff is somehow going to evolve you spiritually. No, really, it's more of a top down that needs to be the approach. And that's something I learned early on in my 20s, because I became a when I had my collapse, it was like, okay, I just have to eat better. You know, I have to do all this physical stuff to recover myself. But then I realized, no, that wasn't going to work. I had the cart before the horse, and I needed to get the horse before the cart, which means to put the spiritual things first before the physical, and the physical will be blessed and touched and enhanced by that. One other thing I'll mention is that something I'm quite proud about, and the work that I do is a component of the spiritual boot camp, which I called skilled friends. Skilled friends, where I'm really trying to impart to people skills so that they can hold space for others, right? Because when you've got issues in your life, you got problems, you turn to your friends, you turn to your family. And sometimes you get good support, sometimes you don't. It depends on whether the person's got the skills to hold space for you. And, you know, like what I really want to do with skilled friends is to phase out, you know, the need for gurus, the need for life coaches, the need for therapists, the need for psychiatrists and whatnot, where you can really turn to the people that are around you, where you don't have to pay them money, and they hold space for you, because life inherently has riddles in it. You know, like your life gives you riddles. You can't avoid it. You have riddles, you have puzzles. And what you really need is space so that you can unpack yourself and you can unpack answers from within yourself. And then you don't have to be running to this person, to that authority, to this expert, and so forth for answers, which can be often very confusing because you don't know who to believe, you don't know who to listen to. But when you learn to really unpack from within yourself, then you've really got something to work with that's going to be powerful. So that's going to be part of this class, is really this idea of skilled friends, that you become skilled in holding space for others. And on that note, we're going to have an experiential exercise right now before we take a little break. A little circle exercise. And it's quite simple. I'm just going to ask a question to you and give you a minute to think about it. And then after that, we're going to have a go round and everybody's going to share some of their reflection. So the question is, what annoys you about other people? What is it that pushes your buttons, pulls your trigger, gets under your skin about other people? Just one thing. It doesn't have to be the biggest thing, but just something that you find annoying in your fellow human being. So I'm going to give you a minute of silence to think about that. All right, so that was a great exercise, and go around with that question, what annoys you about people? And now we can find out what annoys you about each other here in the room. Start to go down that road. Why not? You know, just let's create more messes that we have to clean up, and then we evolve. That's kind of the nature of things here on this plane of existence. It's creating messes and then finding out what's the message in the mess. So this class is called Everything You Need to Know About the Ego. Do we need to know about the ego? And I wrote it on the board there, and I put need in capital letters. Do we really need to know about the ego? What is it that makes the ego so important that we need to know about it? How many times have you heard someone say, get rid of your ego? Get rid of your ego.
Sometimes I can't.
What is it about the ego that people say you need to get rid of it? If you go online and you look at books about the ego, you'll find that there's books called The Ego is Not Your Friend, Ego is the Great Enemy, The Ego Kills, Ego Kills Your Talent, Kill the Ego, and how to kill your ego. Wow. What is it that is about the ego that makes it so powerful that it draws so much attention and such a fierce need to do away with it? You don't hear people saying that about other things like your body parts, like get rid of your left arm, or, kill your emotions, or, blow your foot off. No, we don't talk about that way with other parts of our being, but somehow the ego draws so much attention and such, vehemence against it that it may be simultaneously the most misunderstood and therefore underused power in a human being. I think there's a lot of confusion around what the ego is. And where there's going to be confusion, there's going to be disempowerment. Confusion and disempowerment. And part of the reason why there's this confusion is because the word ego is used in different ways, in different contexts, in different traditions, in different schools of thought. So in this class on everything you need to know about the ego, one of the things we're going to do is have an overview of the different perspectives, the different schools of thought that refer to the ego and how they refer to the ego. And out of that, we'll start to see, how the ego functions. What these perspectives have to say about the functions of the ego. And I've been creating a list of at least 15 or 20 different functions of the ego. Then we're going to look at different aberrations or diseases of the ego, how the ego can become malformed and become a problem when maybe, in fact, it isn't actually a problem. And then building upon that, we'll look at practices and ways to develop a healthy and strong ego. So my intention with this class is that you're so clear on what the ego is that you're going to be able to explain it to others clearly, and that you'd move beyond the confusion of the subject and therefore the disempowerment that may be really self-limiting for you. Because that's kind of the name of the game, is how are we limiting ourselves? So in terms of perspectives, just to begin to go down that road a little bit tonight, is that, we have the Eastern spiritual perspective on what the ego is. Then there's also the Western spiritual perspective. And then there's the Western scientific perspective that has made its way into the Western medical model of things, which is informed primarily by the Freudian school of thought. Sigmund Freud is often considered really the grandfather of modern psychology and therefore psychiatry. Freud, lived in Europe, in Germany, around the turn of the previous century. And he wasn't the only person working on this question of what is the mind. And that had been worked on for really a few centuries. Like, where is the soul? Where is the mind? And nobody ever really figured that out because they couldn't pinpoint it physically. But Sigmund Freud was trying to really deal with the experience of the mind and the problems of the mind and the personality and behavior. And so, he came up with a certain model which pretty much predominates our Western medical scientific model. If you go to a psychologist, they're pretty much working with the Freudian perspective, unless they have gotten outside the box of that. maybe gone more in the direction of the work of Carl Jung, who was a protege of Sigmund Freud, and then broke away and developed a lot of interesting ideas that some of them parallel, but some of them really go farther beyond uh, the ideas of Sigmund Freud. But that's where we're going to begin. We're going to stay close to home right now with what is the predominant model in Western uh, medical perspective of things, with the Freudian perspective. And quite simply, Freud looked at the ego standing in the middle between something lower and something higher. It's kind of like the monkey in the middle, you'd say. And below the ego is what he called the id. And the id basically is this primal drive, an instinctual drive that the human has. And it's affiliated with our sexual libido, the sexual drive. So a lot of the Freudian model really points to the sexual drive, the libido, and how it informs the id. The id, wants to procreate, it wants to have pleasure, it wants to, live out the instincts to be alive. And this can be problematic for the ego, to have to deal with this, especially if it's not kept in check. I mean, can you imagine just running around and letting your id have free reign? Every time it's turned on by something, it just jumps on it and wants to express itself completely unbridled, completely unchecked, completely unfiltered. Maybe that exists in some parts of the world, and does indeed create problems. Creates AIDS epidemics and things like this. So the id has this pushing up from, the kind of this earthy primal force and desire to be alive and to express life. But because not everything is appropriate, there has to be something to keep it in check. And that's what's above the ego, which Freud called the superego. So the superego is something that the ego engages with or employs or aligns with, that helps it to navigate this lower force of life, the id and the accompanying libido, the sexual drive. The superego then, is something that in a way brings a weight down and brings form to this drive, this upward pushing drive. And examples of that, the superego, well, obviously, your parents are the first ones in your life that you're going to listen to. You're going to adhere to their voice, their guidance, their rules. They are the superego that shapes the development of your ego and guides the expression of the id. And then we expand beyond our parental, boundaries. That we go to school, so then we make a transference to teachers, principals, people that are there. Yes.
So if it is kind of like the primal drive, instinctual drive, would the superego be the external impact?
The superego is an external.
If like it is that internal drive, is superego like that external conditioning and impact, that kind of, where's the other one?
Well, that's a great question. That is sort of the question, and we're going to come to that in a moment here when I give you the assignment for the week. But let me just finish this little looking at how this evolves in the development of a child from the parents. We've conferred to our parents as the superego, and then that gets transferred to teachers, at school. It might be transferred to religious teachers, at church or synagogue or mosque and so forth. That the religious system, the religious teachings, the religious commandments, then become the superego. And that would be an external thing, the commandments, the 10 commandments, thou shalt not do this, thou shalt not do that, thou shalt not touch this, thou shalt do this. That really informs the superego of the individual. And not only the individual, perhaps an entire community, a whole group soul can be informed by the religious edicts of a religious system. Or it might even be the government. The government can become the superego.
Where went somewhere else.
Pardon me?
My mind went somewhere else. I'm like, maybe it's Taylor Swift now for the young generation.
Well, we're coming there. I'm working our, let's hold that for a second. Taylor Swift as your superego. It can get scary. It can definitely get scary. When you start to confer power to something outside of yourself, to be the superego that tells the ego what to do, to channel the power of the id. And it's not that the id is bad or evil. It's a necessary force in life. Often think of it as desire. Desire to live, desire to express life. And I love this word desire. If in the Greek it's de sediri, de means of, and sediri means the stars. The desire is of the stars. It's a cosmic force that has come into the earth that wants to express itself in some way. An infinite number of ways, even. So it's a gift. It's really a gift of nature, a gift of life to have this id, to have this desire, to have this force to harness and to work with. And that's the role of the superego, is to harness it in a way. And what I was going to say is that sometimes the government becomes the superego, because the government creates laws and it says, you got to live like this and you got to pay this. And, if you're going to be a citizen in this country, you have to follow all these things. And some people really adhere to that strongly. I often think that people that come to Canada, immigrate to Canada, they particularly want to follow the laws of the land because, for one thing, they may be very thankful to be here and they want to be respectful, and they also don't want to get booted out, right? So they really treat the government and the laws of the land as their superego, and that shapes their ego and really directs the drive of the id. So, but we can just think about that for a moment, see how that can also be problematic in parts of the world that are dramatically different than Canada, because Canada is in some ways pretty good in terms of freedom and leaving people alone to determine their own lives. And here in Canada, you can smoke cannabis, really. It's like, who cares? Get high. But you go to other parts of the world and, it can be a severe punishment. You can be thrown to prison for smoking cannabis and having substances. And a lot of governments around the world they haven't separated out the religious and the political. So it's kind of a double whammy where you not only have the laws of the government, you also have religious laws combined together. And that's a bit of the situation in Egypt, where, I've been studying ancient Egypt, but I've been also exposed to modern Egypt and seeing how things work there. And Egypt's a beautiful country, and the people are beautiful and can be very warm and open-hearted. But we have to look at these things clearly and see how a country like that. Well, right now, the government is a military government. When there was the Arab Spring uprising in 2011, the government that was standing, got booted out, and the military came in and said, "Okay, we're government now. We're the government." So, you have a fairly heavy-handed military regime that poses as a democracy, but isn't really. Not the way we would conceive a pure democracy. So they're basically telling people what's what and how to do things. And then there's the whole religious aspect that's backed by the government. They want people to adhere to kind of a God-fearing religious mindset that is a super ego, right? That's telling this is the way to live. This is how to be righteous. This is how to be approved by God. This is how to get into heaven. This is how to avoid going to hell. And it does make Egypt a safe place. Like there's not a lot of crime in Egypt. But you have 5 times a day people broadcasting over a loudspeaker from the mosques, the commandments of God, and live this way, be upright, treat your neighbors in such a way that people in a way are using that. That's become the superego of a whole population of people. So I'm just using that as an example. I'm not trying to pick on Egypt, because so much of the world is struggling to come into something else. And I don't want to talk about what that something else is yet, because that's a whole big subject. What is it we're trying to evolve into? We'll open that up bit by bit. But, right now I'm trying to give examples of what the superego can look like in life. Sorry, questions over here?
Yeah, comment. And then like the super ego stuff, like I've thought about that a lot. Like I didn't know what I forgot it was called actually from Freud. But I thought about that power structure a lot. And I feel like in the last 100 years it's changed quite a bit. Because 100 years ago we had like no TV, we had like religion. Religion was much stronger. A lot of people were part of that religion, and it was like the control was more definite and more explicit. And then I think over the last 100 years, the power structures, those power structures, they're actually not as strong anymore. So all those principles, everything is getting watered down. And then that's why I laughed at the Taylor Swift thing, because they're getting displaced by other things that have less meaning and less power and less explicit.
You're pointing to how there's a diversity.
Yeah, but it's also getting watered down too.
That's well, yeah, diversity and a watering down, but it's also opening up the road for individuals to pick and choose what is their superego, what is the higher voice that they're going to listen to and follow.
It's also made things more difficult too. It's confusing. The options and variety is confusing.
Well, this is the problem with freedom. When you're given more choice, more options, what's that higher voice that's guiding you? Like you're saying that there's no longer the one super ego for your whole country, or your whole clan, or what have you, and all of a sudden you've got different voices to follow. And you're saying how the media, the diversification of media is allowing us to tap into so many different voices. Now everybody's watching different stuff, different podcasts, different opinions. Although you go to some parts of the world, they control the internet. They control what information you have access to, because they want to be your super ego. They want to control the narrative. They want to control your ego, and they want to direct the power of your id to their benefit, not necessarily to your benefit.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, you mentioned Taylor Swift, and that's a whole nother thing. We can confer the superego to pop stars and rock stars, and people in uh the realm of pop culture, and start listening to their opinions, for better or worse. you know um but also our peers. We may follow peer pressure and what our friends tell us to do. That may become our super ego as well. But ultimately, it's like, well, what are my friends doing? What do they say I should do? And we end up following them. Your home play for the week, you're going to get home play each week,
Mhm.
is the question to contemplate is, who or what is your super ego?
Mm.
And I mean, there's a lot to play with there. You can see how it's evolved from your childhood and where it's arrived now. And are you satisfied with that? Maybe there's more growing to take place in your life to go beyond the enclosure of whatever or whoever your super ego is currently. Maybe you have a spouse that tells you what to do. You're always like, what should I do? What should I do? And they tell you what to do. That might indicate there's some growing needed on your part to be able to become your own super ego and tap into your own higher voice. So that's the home play for this week, is what or who is your super ego, and what is the dynamic? What is the dynamic around that? And when we get together next week, we'll have some circle time to be able to hear and discuss and share our own personal experiences and pool that together so we can all learn from each other's experiences and help in the collective awakening.
When you
Yes.
say what is the dynamic?
Yeah. Is it oppressive? Is it liberating?
Mm.
Is it keeping you in a place of immaturity? Are you happy with it? Are you not happy with it? Are you still, living like a child under your parents' authority? That's what I mean by the dynamic. Yeah, this is really about making what is unconscious conscious. And what part of us is doing that? So right now we're looking at the Freudian model of the id, the ego, and the superego. It's fairly simple structure, but I find it helpful. I find there's some value in this Freudian view. So we're going to play with it as a starting point.